work day to start with. And then after that, we open presents at home, and then we rush to my parents' house and we have family lunch there. And then we drive down the coast to Deb's parents' house. We get there sort of late at night and hang out there for a while. Then the next day, we open more presents on Boxing Day with my wife's family. And then we have another Christmas lunch, which is awesome. And then the following day, we fight the South Coast traffic as we drive down to Lake Tabourie before we set up our our campsite for about 2 hours in the hot sun. Now, as busy as all that sounds, I actually enjoy it all. I mean, like, it is Christmas for one thing, but all those things that we do lead towards the moment that I'm really looking forward to of my holiday. And that is sitting down with a cold drink after the campsite is all set up. And the reason that's the point I look forward to on my holiday is because that is when I officially have nothing to do for a week and a half other than laze on the beach. All right, my mind says, okay, now you're on holidays. Now, we all have things that we look forward to in life, whether it be, a holiday, it could be catching up with family or friends, it could be a new movie coming out or a new stage show, maybe just a nice dinner that night. We all have little joys in our life, and there will be things that we do in the lead up to those joyful occasions. Now, as Christians, we have the event to end all events to look forward to. We have the holiday to end all holidays ahead of us. How crippling it must it be for atheists to not have that ahead of them, to think that, one moment they're here and then the next moment they're gone. Like, the only way to sort of deal with the terror of that must be to stick their head in the sand and just pretend that it's not actually there. But one of the great joys about being a Christian is that Jesus has told us exactly what lies ahead for us. And it is glorious. And so this holiday to end all holidays actually shapes our whole life as Christians. Well, at least it should. Sadly, too many Christians spend more time preparing for retirement than they do for eternity. Right? Too many Christians live just like the atheists do. And that's why this passage that was just read for us is really important. This is why we need this passage, because in this passage, the Apostle Paul spells out for us exactly what happens when we die. Now, that alone makes this passage arguably the most interesting passage in all of 2 Corinthians. And that's saying something, because this series has been awesome, has it not? But the real beauty of this passage, it's not that it's intellectually interesting, it's that it spells out the incredible glory that awaits you and I on the other side of this life. And what this means is, this passage should be everything to us. Like, what a privilege to know what's going to happen in the future. And that privilege should shape our lives in this world. And that's our goal for today, all right? We're going to see what our glorious future holds and how that should shape our present life. And I've got 3 points, as you can see on your inside of your news sheet, to help us unpack this today. So we're going to begin by looking at what happens in the future. That's verses 1 to 8. We're then going to see how this impacts our present, verse 9. And then we're going to conclude by looking at why our future impacts our present. Why our future impacts our present. And that's verse 10. And spoiler alert, verse 10 has a real kick to it. But because we're looking at a big topic today, I thought we won't have a reflection time today. We're going to have a question time instead. So I'll open up for questions at the end if there's anything I don't cover. But until then, let's dive in and look at our glorious future and how it impacts our present. And our passage begins, you can see it there, 2 Corinthians 5 verse 1. It begins with the word for. And what does that mean? It means Paul is about to explain last week's passage. Now, if you were blessed enough to be here last week, you would have heard Scott explain that we as Christians are hard-pressed, we are perplexed, we are persecuted, and we are struck down. That's verses 8 and 9. All right, the Christian life is not a beach holiday. It is taking up your cross. And that's a metaphor for suffering. Okay? And so how does Paul handle all this suffering? Well, as we learnt last week, he fixes his eyes not on this life, but on the life to come. So if you've got there, just have a quick look at 2 Corinthians 4, verse 17. For our light and momentary troubles, right, he's not focusing on that, they are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And then in today's passage, Paul zooms in and shows what this eternal glory will be like. So read it with me, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 1. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, because when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. Another complicated passage. Thank you, Paul. Well, let's see if we can try and simplify this a bit for us, but we're going to need our thinking caps on for the next 60 seconds or so. So, Paul is referring in these 3 verses, or actually in these 8 verses, to 3 different states of being that you and I experience. All right? And if we can get our heads around these 3 states of being, then Paul's message in this passage becomes much clearer. So, state number 1 is what he refers to as the earthly tent. Now, what is the earthly tent? He's talking about our bodies that we are living in right now. Okay, our earthly bodies. And the reason he refers to it as a tent is because tents are flimsy. Every year after our summer holiday, we go up to CMS Summer School and we stay at the Ross's house. Thank you, Team Ross. And a couple of years ago, someone grabbed me one morning and said, they said to me in the middle of summer school, how did you go with the weather last night? And I said, what weather? And he said, oh, it was really windy and rainy. It was giving our tent a real battering. And I said, oh, we're in a house. We're not camping. We didn't even notice the weather, all right? That's the thing. Tents are flimsy. And that's why Paul calls our earthly bodies a tent, right? It is decaying and it will one day die. So that's state of being number 1. State number 3, we'll come back to 2 in a second. State number 3 is a building from God. Now, this is what theologians refer to as our resurrection body. All right, this is a body that will not decay, that will not die. It is actually perfectly fit to live for all eternity. Now, when Jesus rose on Easter Sunday, he had his resurrection body. That's why the disciples didn't recognize him straight away. Like there was still something similar about him, but he was different, all right? So he could still eat and they could still touch him. He was a real body, but he could, miraculously appear in a locked room. Like he could walk through walls, basically. Now, though the disciples didn't recognize him immediately, after they talked with him for a while, they realized who it was. He looked different, but they realized that it was still Jesus. So that's state number 3. State number 2 is what Paul is referring to when he says being naked, verse 2, or being unclothed in verse 4. Now, what does that mean? Well, look, when we die, our soul is ripped from our body. It's a very unnatural and nasty process. It was never meant to be a part of God's good creation, right? But because of mankind's sin, death entered the world in Genesis 3. And when our soul is ripped from our body stays here to decay, whether it be in a coffin or in a crematorium, one way or another, while our soul goes to be with the Lord. Now, we see this in verse 8. If you have a look at verse 8 with me. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. Right? So that's our 3 states, the 3 states of being. Now, how do they fit together? Well, here's the process. Right? If you are a Christian, when you die, your soul goes straight to be with the Lord in a spirit realm somewhere. Now, this is, I think, why many people think that heaven is floating around on clouds, all right? This is actually what it's talking about. We are in some sort of spiritual or bodiless, naked state. Theologians call it the intermediate state, like it's the state between versus like states 1 and states 3. State 2 is the intermediate state, all right? Now, we don't know where this spirit realm is, and we don't know really what it's going to be like. All we know is that God is there. Therefore, it's better than here and now. That's why Paul says, I want to go there. I want to be with the Lord. Now, non-Christians, we believe, are held some other place awaiting judgment. That's all we know about them. But for Christians, we get to hang out in state number 2 with God while we await Jesus' return. Okay, while we await Judgment Day. So in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, if you want to write that down and you can look it up later on, we are told that when Jesus returns on Judgment Day, he will bring with him the souls of all the Christians who have died. All right, we're hanging out in this spirit realm and we get to come with Jesus when he comes back. And then those souls are going to be reunited with their earthly bodies somehow. Right, even though our earthly tent may have decayed or been cremated millennia earlier, God will somehow work it out and he's going to give us back state number 1. Then the believers who are still alive when Jesus returns, with the believers who died but now have their physical bodies back, we're going to be, and this is quoting 1 Thessalonians 4:7, we will be caught up together to meet the Lord in the air. And it's at that point that we will get our resurrection bodies. State number 3. The word clothed in verses 2 and 3, it's more accurately translated as clothed over. It's like putting an outer garment on over an undergarment. So our resurrection body is going to be put on over our current earthly tent. What that means is we're still going to recognize each other, but we will be different. And it's at that point that the new heavens and the new earth will appear and we get to live in paradise forever. Now, that's a lot to take in, but the upshot is really simple. You and I as Christians have nothing to fear about death. Now, we might fear dying, the process of dying. Like if I had a choice out of being eaten alive by bears or a quiet heart attack in my sleep, I'll take the latter one. Thank you very much. But with the exception of dying, Christians know exactly what's going to happen to us. And Christians know it is glorious. Right? The second after we close our eyes in death, we will open them with the Lord. And we will hang out with him forever. So, brothers and sisters, please know that you and I, as Christians, we have nothing to fear about death. For it only makes us better. So, that's our glorious future, as Paul outlines in verses 1 to 8. Paul then, in verse 9, tells us how this glorious future should impact our present. Read it with me. So we make it our goal to please him. So we make it our goal to please him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. And the reason we make it our goal to please him is because that future we just talked about is all of grace. And do you know what grace is? Right? Grace is being given something that you don't deserve by someone who is not obliged to give it. Right? Being given something we don't deserve by someone who's not obliged to give it. So let me explain with a couple of examples. So I'll give you the example of a worker. A worker puts in a hard week's work. He deserves to get paid at the end. Right? He deserves that. That's not grace. A wage is not grace. It's something that's deserved. I'll give you a second example. Picture a ratbag kid being a real ratbag one afternoon, all afternoon, just making mum's life a living misery. He should or she should be given like bread and water for dinner, deserve a nice dinner, but the parent gives their kid a nice dinner anyway. Now, in a sense, that parent is obliged to feed their kid, aren't they? I mean, there's an obligation that comes with having a kid to feed your kid and love your kid. So it's kind of grace, but it's not really grace because they're obliged. All right, for real grace, imagine a really horrible neighbor. And this horrible neighbor always blaring their music. It's, 11 decibels turned up to 11. They're always having like late night parties well into 1 o'clock in the morning and, just making life difficult. But if you ever have people over, well, they ring the cops to complain about your noise, and they're always letting their dog, do its business all over your lawn, all right? Imagine this, they get sick, like really sick. And what you do is you cook them a meal and you mow their lawn and you walk their dog. Right? That's grace. Grace is being given something you don't deserve. He doesn't deserve it. Being given something that you don't deserve by someone who has no obligation to give it. And that's what heaven is. You see, you and I, we don't deserve the good place. We deserve the bad place because of our sin. Now remember, sin is committing treason against the one person we are infinitely obliged to obey. And we've all done that. We've all said, no, God, I don't want to live my life the way you want me to. I'm going to do it my way. And for that, we deserve the bad place. Now, on top of that, God is under no obligation to give us entry into the good place. Yet he chose to, even though that came at the death of his only beloved Son. Right? The only reason you and I are let into heaven is because Jesus took the punishment for our sin on himself at the cross. Now, how do you respond to such a gift like that? Right? If someone gives you something of infinite value that comes at infinite cost to them, even though they are under zero obligation to do so, how do we respond? Do we continue to commit high treason against them? No. Verse 9, so we make it our goal to please him. That's what the Christian life should be. Believers making sure that everything we do, say, and think pleases God. Now, we're not doing it to earn salvation. That's already been given to us. We have it on a silver platter. We do so to say thanks, to show our gratitude. So how do we make sure that everything we do, say, or think pleases God? Well, step one is to figure out what pleases God. All right, Ephesians 5:10, find out what pleases the Lord. Find out what pleases the Lord. All right, and so when we read the Bible, we realize that gossip does not please the Lord. But words of encouragement do. Drunkenness does not please the Lord. But speaking wise words, spirit-filled words, do. Pride does not please the Lord. But thinking less of ourselves and more of others does please him. Sexual immorality does not please the Lord in any of its forms, whether it be porn, sex before marriage, lustful thoughts, or adultery. But pure, God-honoring relationships do please the Lord. These are the kind of things that it should be our goal in life. All right? Greed does not please the Lord, but generosity does. Factions do not please the Lord, but living in peace with one another does. Bitterness and resentment do not please the Lord, but mercy and forgiveness does. Selfishness does not please the Lord, but selflessly serving others does. Right? If our future is the infinite gift of heaven, purchased at infinite price to God, when he has zero obligation to do so, then our present life is making it our goal to please him. Well, if only Paul had stopped at verse 9. If only it said we make it our goal to please God because it is right and fitting to please the one who has given us everything. That makes sense. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to give us one of the most difficult verses in the Bible. All right, so verse 10 starts with for. So he's explaining what he's just said again. He's giving us another reason why we please God. Verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ so that each of us may receive what is due for us, due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Now, this verse that picks up something I kind of glossed over in point 1. So point 1, I laid out the process for what happens when Jesus returns, okay? So when he comes, he's going to bring the souls of all those who have died with him, and those souls are reunited with their physical bodies, all right? And then those resurrected Christians, along with the Christians who are still alive, we are caught up together to meet the Lord in the air. What I glossed over was judgment. You see, just before the new heavens and the new earth come down, verse 10, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Now, 3 important things about this verse. Number 1, we must all appear before the judgment seat, Christians and non-Christians. Number 2, we will receive what is due us. It will be fair and impartial. And number 3, what is due us is based on the things we've done. Now, wait a minute, Brennan. Wait a minute. You just told us in point 2 that heaven is an undeserved gift. It's grace, right? And you tell that to us every week. Right, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourself, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. So how can Ephesians 2, 9 say it's not by works, then 2 Corinthians 5:10 say it is by works? Right? Is it salvation by grace or salvation by works? I told you verse 10 had a kick. Well, the answer is yes. Let me explain. Now remember, grace is being given a gift that you don't deserve by someone with zero obligation to give it. And when those 3 points sink into a person's heart, it changes them. You simply cannot help but being changed by something like that. You see, in the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, the ghost that made the biggest impact on him was the ghost of Christmas Present. The reason being that he showed him a vision of one of his relatives. Now, in the book, I think it's his nephew. In the Bill Murray movie, it's his brother. Whichever one you look at, that relative says something really nice about Scrooge behind his back, when Scrooge has been nothing but nasty to them behind their back. And that's what changes him. Right? That's grace. It is being given a gift, all right? Scrooge was given the gift of a compliment that he didn't deserve by someone who was not obliged to give it. It was behind his back. He wasn't there to hear this wonderful compliment. It changed him. So here's the thing. The person who does the good things while in the body, 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10, are those who have already received God's grace. Right? Even though Christians still sin, excuse me, our understanding of what Jesus did for us some 2,000 years ago makes us want to repent of our sins and do better. You see, those who do good are those who are already in the kingdom. And so when Paul says we receive what is due us for the things we've done, those works are not payment for salvation, they are proof of salvation. Think of it this way. It's like that time when 2 prostitutes come before King Solomon. You remember this this story. And one of the prostitutes says, look, I live with this woman and we both had babies together just a few weeks ago, but I woke up this morning to find my baby dead. Devastated. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't my baby. It was the other woman's baby. She had accidentally smothered her baby in the night and woken up to find the baby dead and came and swapped with mine while I was asleep. And the other woman says, no, the live baby is my baby. And so what does Solomon do? He says, here's my judgment, cut the baby in half and give half to each woman. And the first woman says, no, don't do that. Just give that lady my baby. That's fine. And the other lady says, fine, let's do it. Cut it up. Who cares? And Solomon then says, you give the baby to the first woman. Now, why did Solomon say to cut the baby in half? He was not looking for who deserved the baby. He was looking for who already owned it. And that's what's going to happen on Judgment Day. Right? Even though we've all sinned, God is not going to be looking at our sin. That's already been paid for by Jesus' death. Right? He'll be looking at our good works. And those good works, we're told, will determine, this is another important part of this verse, will determine what kind of reward we will get in heaven. Now, there are various places in the New Testament. One of the examples is in Matthew 25, where Jesus tells us we will get different levels of reward in heaven. So those who have been the most faithful with their talents here on earth will be given greater rewards in heaven. Now, we don't know what that means. Chances are people like Moses and Elijah and David will probably be closer to the front, closer to God. The rest of us will just be happy for them because we're in heaven. We're having a ball. But we're told that there are different levels of reward in heaven. But that is our glorious future, brothers and sisters. As soon as we die, we are at home with the Lord, awaiting our resurrection body, fit for eternity with the Lord. Even Judgment Day, which we all have to face, is going to be glorious. Right? They're not going to put in a DVD of our sin to play on the big screen. That's all been paid for. They're going to put a DVD in of our good works. While Jesus looks at us and says, well done, good and faithful servants. That's our future that we don't deserve, that has been locked in by someone who has zero obligation to give it to us. So what do we do in the meantime? We make it our goal to please him, whether we're at home in the body or away from it. A big topic, 2 Corinthians 5, so I thought I'd open it up, and if there's any questions people have, I'll see what I can do. Yes, Anne. Yep. Thanks for that really simple question, Anne. How does predestination fit into all this? How am I going to answer that one in 30 seconds? So predestination is a biblical principle. It is a correct principle. Not everyone believes it. So people who call themselves Calvinists believe that it is God who is in charge of what happens. There's another group called Arminianists who believe it is all about us. I actually think God gets more glory as a Calvinist. And so what it says is those who actually turn to the Lord because God knocked on their door. Okay? So the best way I heard it put many years ago was this. If I were to, hit you on the head, you would probably go, ouch, and before you punch me back, but you'd ouch and rub your head. Now, here's the question. Who made you rub your head? It wasn't me. I didn't grab your hand and go like this, all right? You rubbed your head, but you would not have rubbed your head unless I first hit you. And so the way predestination works is you and I do not turn to the Lord until he first hits us on the head and says, hey, turn to me. And at that point, we are in and we stay in. And as a Christian then, we, have that grace of the Lord sink deep into our hearts, and we live our life the way a Christian should live, by pleasing the Lord. And then when we die, we get to go to be with the Lord forever. I think that's the easiest way I can explain it without doing a 30-minute sermon on it. But good question. Thanks, Anne. Nick. Okay, really good question. So Nick touched on that last point I was making, and I had to cover it quickly. I thought maybe we would cover it in question time. I don't want to be here all day, but there are certain passages in the Bible that say there are different levels of reward in heaven. There's actually a passage that says there's different levels of punishment in hell. So Jesus actually says some people will be beaten with many blows and some people will be beaten with few blows. Now that's a metaphor of some description. It's in Luke's gospel for different levels of punishment. So, chances are Hitler is going to be getting punished more severely than, some of the good people who do not have their sins forgiven. In heaven, there will be different levels of reward. Now, what should we do about that? In answer to Nick's question, I don't think we should be spending very much time at all thinking, I want to do something to get more reward in heaven. That's a very proud thing. It's all focused on us, and it's talking about our own glory. And that's the exact opposite of what pleases the Lord. What pleases the Lord is focusing on him, keeping our eyes fixed on him. That's what the last verse of 2 Corinthians 4 says. We fix our eyes on Jesus and on our future glory, and that should just make us want to please the Lord more and more. So that's what we should focus on, not our reward, or other than our reward is God. And I actually think, the different levels of reward are getting closer to God. That's what my suspicion is. Like, we're not going to have a big mansion and a nice Mercedes or anything like that. Like that, nothing compared to the Lord. Our reward is the Lord, and so we should look forward to that. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Ian. Yeah. So Ian's question is about purgatory. Where does the Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory fit into this process? To be honest, I'm not actually sure. I don't know if purgatory is part of the disembodied state. I suspect it. Well, like, I'm talking out of ignorance here. I actually don't know. Do you know, David? It's the intermediate state? Yeah, okay. So Dave's an ex-Roman Catholic, and he probably knows more than I do. It seems to be in the intermediate state. We spend so many years paying off our sin. Jesus' death was not enough. That's why we reject the doctrine of purgatory outright. Not only is it not in the Bible, but it takes the glory away from God. Right? He gets all the glory because he's paid for all of our sins. So my suspicion, thank you for the help with Dave, is that purgatory would be in the intermediate state before you get your resurrection body. But like I said, I reject it all. Yeah. Anyone else? Sharon. Oh, we've got 3 or 4. Sharon first. Yep. 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 Mm. Yeah. That's right. That's right. So Sharon's question is about when does the new heaven and the new earth appear in this process? So when we die, if we die before Jesus' return, we are taken to a spiritual realm somewhere. We're not told anything about it as to where it is or what it's like, but it's kind of like a temporary heaven. And then when Jesus returns, in Revelation, we're told that this earth is wiped away and a new earth appears and new heavens appear. And so eternity is actually going to be spent on this earth. We're not going to be floating around in the clouds. We're going to be in a body state. We're going to be walking around on this earth, but it's not going to be this earth. It's going to be a reconstituted earth, a perfect earth. And so that happens on Judgment Day. When Jesus returns, we get our physical bodies because we need to be physical, all right, to walk in our physical earth. And that's where we're going to be living for the rest of eternity on this earth. Good. Well, the new heaven is like the heavens above us. We'll get to see the stars. There'll be birds. There's like, I think that's what the new heavens and the new earth is. We're not going to be floating out in space. We're going to be walking on this earth. And so the new heavens are, new constellations and things like that. Yeah. Well, we're not going to be in that disembodied state forever. We're going to be physical beings on this earth, and that is the eternal heaven. Not sure, but the old heavens, like the stars and the constellations, will. Yeah. Did you want to follow up with that, Gail? Yep. Another easy question. Thank you so much. Where does the rapture fit into this? And the rapture is a whole nother sermon. We actually did a sermon on it last year. So the rapture, there's two views, three views basically. There's what's called the premillennialist view, the post-millennialist view, and the amillennialist view. And it's all about this passage in Revelation chapter 20 about 1,000-year reign. And we are amillennialists, and we think that the 1,000-year reign in Revelation 20 is metaphorical for where we are right now. So we're living in the millennium right now. And so the rapture for us is going to be on Judgment Day when we are caught up together in the sky with Jesus, ready for judgment and ready for the new heavens and the new earth. If you are a premillennialist, you think that there is a future 1,000 years where non-believers are going to live on a really horrible earth, whereas believers are going to be taken up to live for 1,000 years with God in the spiritual realm for 1,000 years. Amillennialists such as myself and most of the Sydney Anglican Diocese don't believe that. We believe the rapture happens, and we don't even talk about the rapture really, but we believe it happens on Judgment Day when, in 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 17, we are caught up together with him in the clouds. Yeah. Scott. I'm sure it is. Go. Yep. Yeah. So, God's good question. How can we use 1 Corinthians 5 verses 1 to 10, talking about our future glory, to help pastor a Christian brother or sister who is, on their deathbed, I guess, and quite distressed about it? And that's a really good question. What we need to say is we're very sad about the pain that is happening. That is not how God wanted it to be. Believe it or not, I think it's verse 9. It says that He who designed us for this. So in the Garden of Eden, we were designed for a resurrection body. So if the fall never happened, we would still at one point get a resurrection body. We were designed for that from the beginning. But death entered into the world. And so we need to tell them that death is not nice. It is not a nice part of it. But that verse that says, I think it's the verse 17, our fleeting suffering is not even worth comparing to the glory that will await us. And so I think the best way to pastor a Christian brother or sister is to pray for their suffering and to say, show empathy with the suffering, but point them to what is awaiting them. And it's just around the corner. It is going to be glorious. I think that's the best way. Good question. I might have time for one or two more. Did you have one, David? Go. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the souls of those under the altar saying, "How long, O Lord?" Dave's question is, does that mean that this temporary heaven is not completely blissful? And that's a good question. What I would say, though, is what they're crying out for is not relief. They're crying out for justice. And so when they say, "How long, O Lord?" what they're saying is, how long until you actually bring about your perfect justice against those who are rebelling against you and hurting your people? I think, so the Apostle Paul in this passage, he says, look, this temporary heaven is not what I'm looking forward to. What I'm looking forward to is state number 3. That's where perfection comes. That's where we're going to be spending the rest of eternity. State number 2 is a waiting room. But because God is there, it is infinitely better than where we are right here and now. And so I think the intermediate state is going to be a blissful, glorious state, but we will know that it's not our final state, that we've still got something else to look forward to. And so maybe that's what the saints in Revelation 6 are looking forward to as well, but my memory is they're crying out for justice in that point. Yeah. All right, might have time for one more. Unless there's no more. Deb, go.
Thank you for answering questions. It is a really difficult concept to get around, and it's quite daunting, I'm sure, being up there, getting everyone with you and wanting to do it. So thank you for actually doing that.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it. All right. Oh, Sharon, you got another one? Okay, go. Yep. Does it mean there's mansions in heaven? In my room, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. I'd have to go back and look at the exact word. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there's other translations that say many rooms. I think the principle that Jesus is getting at is we're not all going to have this beautiful mansion to laze around in. That's not going to be our reward. Like, please, Lord, don't give me a mansion. I don't want a mansion. I want you. You are my reward. You are my portion. You are my inheritance. And so when it says you have many rooms, it means there's going to be plenty of room for all of God's people to come and enjoy their real reward, which is not a big, lovely, shiny house with a Maserati in the front porch. It is hanging out with the Lord. And so that's what I think we need to look forward to. Yeah. I need to close it there. It's a good note to finish on, pointing at what our future reward is. And we're going to stand and sing now a song that talks about, among other things, that future reward in heaven. Let's stand and sing. There is a fountain filled with blood.